He took away my debit card and told me I was too old to handle money. I nodded and stayed quiet, but what I did next made him lose everything. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Stay with my story until the very end and comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far my voice has traveled. At 70 years old, I never imagined my own son would make me feel like a burden. But sitting in Damien's home office that Tuesday afternoon in late September, watching him slide my bank card across his mahogany desk toward himself, I realized I'd been naive about a lot of things. The afternoon sun, streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows, cast long shadows across the room, and I couldn't help but feel I was sitting in one of those shadows permanently now. "Mom, we've talked about this," Damien said, not meeting my eyes as he placed my card in his expensive leather wallet. "You're getting forgetful. Last month, you couldn't remember your PIN at the grocery store on Riverside Avenue. It's safer this way." I stared at the wallet that now contained my financial independence. The debit card connected to the account where my late husband's pension, my Social Security, and my small savings all lived. Money I'd carefully managed for 43 years. Funds that represented every sacrifice, every careful budget decision, every late night I'd worked overtime to build security for my future. Gone in a single moment, slipped into my son's wallet like it had always belonged there. "I remembered it eventually," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was just tired that day. I'd been at the Riverside Medical Clinic all morning for my checkup. Dr. Patterson ran extra tests, and I was exhausted. The numbers just got jumbled in my head for a moment." "Exactly my point." Damien leaned back in his leather chair. "The expensive one from that Italian furniture store downtown. The chair that had cost more than my monthly income, more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. You're tired. You're overwhelmed. These things happen at your age, Mom. It's completely natural. Let Sienna and me handle the finances. We'll make sure all your bills are paid on time, your medications are ordered and delivered, everything taken care of. You won't have to worry about a single thing." Sienna. His girlfriend of 8 months, who had moved into his expansive house in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision 6 weeks ago and somehow become the co-manager of my life. I'd watched it happen gradually, so slowly that I hadn't recognized the danger until it was too late. First, she was just joining us for Sunday dinners. Then she was offering helpful suggestions about my medication schedule. Then she was accompanying Damien when he visited me, always with some gentle criticism disguised as concern. "Dorothy, are you sure you should be driving at night? Dorothy, maybe you should let us handle your grocery shopping. Dorothy, wouldn't it be easier if we managed your appointments?" She appeared in the doorway now as if summoned by the mention of her name, carrying a tray with tea I hadn't asked for. She moved with calculated grace, her designer heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Everything about Sienna was calculated, I was beginning to realize. Every gesture, every smile, every concerned word. "Here you go, Dorothy," she said with that bright smile that never quite reached her pale blue eyes. "Chamomile with honey, just the way you mentioned you like it last week. We want you comfortable while we discuss these important family matters." I accepted the delicate china cup with trembling hands, noting that it was part of a set I'd never seen before. Expensive, like everything else in this house that Damien had somehow acquired in the past year. When had my son, who'd been struggling to make ends meet just 18 months ago, suddenly become so prosperous? His consulting business was doing well, he'd said. New clients, bigger contracts. I'd been proud of him, grateful that my years of sacrifice to put him through college had paid off. Now I wondered if there was another explanation entirely. Sienna was 32, beautiful in that polished way that spoke of expensive salons and regular spa treatments.
Her honey blonde hair always perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her clothes designer labels that I recognized from window shopping in the upscale boutiques downtown. She claimed to be between jobs, transitioning careers, but I'd never seen her send out a single resume or attend a single interview. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound like a generous favor, even when she was taking something away from you, especially when she was taking something away from you. Damien is absolutely right, Sienna continued, perching on the arm of his chair with practiced casualness. Her hand rested on his shoulder possessively, her perfectly manicured nails a deep burgundy that matched her silk blouse. Managing finances is incredibly stressful, especially in today's complicated world. My own grandmother was so relieved when my uncle took over her accounts. She said it was like a weight lifted off her shoulders. She could finally just enjoy her retirement without worrying about bills and bank statements and all those tedious details. But I've always managed my own money, I tried to explain, setting the teacup down because my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. Even when your father was alive, Damien, I handled our household budget. I balanced the checkbook every month, paid all the bills, managed our savings. Your father used to say I was better with numbers than any accountant he'd ever met.
That was different, Mom. Damien's voice held an edge of impatience now, a tone I'd never heard him use with me before Sienna entered his life. Dad was there to help if you made mistakes. Now you're alone. And frankly, we can't afford for you to accidentally miss a payment or fall for one of those phone scams targeting seniors. Do you know how many elderly people lose their life savings every year to scammers? The word seniors hung in the air like an accusation, like a label that diminished everything I was and had been. When had I become a senior who couldn't be trusted? When had I transformed from his mother, the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died, into a problem that needed managing, into someone incapable of basic adult functions? I've never fallen for a scam, I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. I'm very careful. I never give out personal information on the phone. I don't click on suspicious emails. I shred all my financial documents before throwing them away. Your father and I were always very security conscious. But that was then, Mom. Sienna's voice was gentle, sympathetic, like she was explaining something to a confused child. The world has changed. Scammers are so much more sophisticated now. They can make calls that look like they're coming from your bank. They create fake websites that look exactly like the real ones. Even young people fall for these things. At your age, with your memory not being what it used to be, you're especially vulnerable. I wanted to argue that my memory was fine, that one forgotten PIN number didn't indicate cognitive decline. But I could see in their faces that they'd already decided I was old, therefore I was incompetent. I was 70, therefore I needed to be managed like a child. What if I need something? I asked, trying a different approach. What if I want to buy a gift for my friend Rosemary's birthday? Or treat myself to lunch with the ladies from my book club? What if I see something at the store that I'd like to purchase? Just ask, Sienna said, simply, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. We'll get you whatever you need. In fact, it'll be so much easier this way. No more worrying about whether you have enough cash in your purse or remembering to go to the ATM before you go out. No more stress about balancing your checkbook or making sure you have enough in your account for purchases. We'll handle all of that. Damien nodded enthusiastically, as if Sienna had just proposed the most brilliant solution imaginable. We'll set you up with a weekly allowance. Say $50. That should be more than enough for your incidentals, coffee with friends, small purchases, that sort of thing. $50. The words echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. My pension from the school district where I'd worked as an administrator for 30 years, combined with my Social Security and the survivor benefits from Gerald's pension, gave me nearly $3,000 a month. Money I'd earned through decades of hard work, careful planning, and sensible financial decisions. And my son was offering me $50 a week like I was a teenager getting allowance for taking out the trash?
"And what about the rest of my money?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to maintain some shred of dignity in this conversation that was stripping me of everything. "What happens to it? Where does it go?" "It stays in your account, obviously," Damien said, though something in his tone made me uneasy. A slight shift, a barely perceptible change that set off alarm bells in the back of my mind. "We'll just manage it for you. Make sure your rent is paid on time to your landlord at Riverside Apartments, your utilities are covered, your phone bill is current, everything's taken care of. You'll never have to stress about money again. Isn't that what you want? To just relax and enjoy your retirement?" I looked between my son and this woman who had appeared in his life so suddenly and completely. Damien had always been ambitious, always wanted more than what he had. Even as a child, he'd been driven, focused on success and achievement. But he'd never been unkind. He'd never treated me like I was incapable or simple-minded. He'd never looked at me with this mixture of impatience and something else I was afraid to name. Until Sienna arrived. I tried to remember exactly when things had changed. It had been gradual, so subtle that I hadn't noticed the shift until it was too late. Damien had introduced me to Sienna at a restaurant last February. The Riverside Bistro, I remember, because I'd been impressed that he'd chosen such an upscale place. Sienna had been charming, absolutely charming. Warm, interested in my stories, laughing at my jokes, and asking about my life with genuine-seeming curiosity. "I can see where Damien gets his intelligence," she'd said that first evening. "You must have been an amazing mother, Dorothy." I'd been flattered, disarmed by her attention. Here was this beautiful young woman, successful and sophisticated, treating me like I mattered, like I was interesting and valuable, not just Damien's elderly mother who needed to be tolerated during obligatory visits. She had been so helpful at first, offering to drive me to doctor's appointments when Damien was busy with work, bringing me groceries when she was shopping for Damien's house, always brushing away my attempts to pay her back. "Don't be silly, Dorothy. We're family now." Suggesting that maybe I should spend more time at Damien's house instead of alone in my small apartment on the east side of Riverside. "Family should be close," she'd said with that warm smile. "Damien worries about you being alone so much."
Now I understood. It wasn't concern. It was positioning. It was strategy. Getting close to me, earning my trust, making herself indispensable, all while studying my routines, my finances, my vulnerabilities. I had been a target from the very beginning, and I'd been too flattered by the attention to see it. "What if I say no?" I asked quietly, surprising myself with my own boldness. "What if I want to keep managing my own finances?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Damien and Sienna exchanged a look that spoke volumes, an entire conversation happening in that brief glance. His eyes asking a question, hers providing an answer. A team, unified against me. "Mom, don't be difficult about this," Damien said, his voice harder now, stripped of the gentle patience he'd been using before. "We're trying to help you. Do you really want to make this into a big problem? Do you want to create family drama over something that's being done for your own good?" "I'm not trying to make problems. I'm just trying to understand why I suddenly can't access my own money. Money I earned. Money your father and I saved for decades." "Because you can't be trusted with it." The words exploded out of Damien before he could stop them, harsh and cutting in the quiet room. His face flushed red immediately after, as if he'd surprised himself with his own vehemence. He took a breath, visibly trying to calm himself, running his hand through his dark hair the way he'd done since he was a boy when he was frustrated. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. But Mom, you have to face reality. You're 70 years old. You get confused. You forget things. What if you gave your account information to a scammer? What if you fell for one of those fake IRS calls or those emails claiming you've won a lottery you never entered?" "I've never fallen for a scam in my life."
I repeated, my voice stronger now, fueled by a growing anger that was beginning to burn through my hurt and confusion. I'm not senile, Damien. One forgotten pin doesn't mean I've lost my mind. There's always a first time. Sienna's voice was sweet as honey, but her eyes were cold as winter frost. And at your age, Dorothy, you might not even realize you'd been scammed until it was too late, until all your money was gone, until your accounts were emptied. We're protecting you, protecting your future, protecting the financial security you and Gerald worked so hard to build. The mention of my late husband's name from her lips felt like a violation, like she was using his memory as a weapon against me. Gerald had been gone for 5 years now, taken by a sudden heart attack that left me reeling and alone. He would have never allowed this. He would have stood beside me, faced down our son, made him see reason. But Gerald wasn't here, and I was alone against the two of them. I looked at my son, really looked at him, searching his face for the boy I'd raised, the child I rocked to sleep when he had nightmares, the teenager I stayed up late with, helping him with homework and talking through his problems, the young man I worked 2 jobs to put through college, taking extra shifts at the school and working weekends at the community center just so he wouldn't have to graduate with crushing student loan debt. The son I supported through his early career struggles, lending him money I could barely afford to spare so he could make rent while building his consulting business from the ground up. This stranger, wearing my son's face, looked back at me with impatience and something else. Something that made my stomach clench with fear. Something that looked almost like greed, like hunger. Like I was nothing more than an obstacle standing between him and something he wanted. "Fine," I said finally, setting down my teacup with a hand that had stopped trembling because I'd passed from fear into a cold, clear resolve. "If that's what you think is best." The relief on Damien's face was immediate and profound, like I'd just agreed to something far more significant than financial management. "You're making the right choice, Mom. You'll see. This is going to make everything so much easier for everyone. You won't have any more stress, any more worries. You can just enjoy your retirement, spend time with your friends, read your books, garden, all the things you love." As I gathered my worn leather purse to leave, Sienna walked me to the front door with her arm around my shoulders, like we were the best of friends, like she was my daughter instead of the woman who just helped strip away my independence. "Oh, Dorothy, one more thing," Sienna said, her voice casual, like she was asking for something trivial. "Damien and I were thinking it might be good if you gave us your apartment key, just in case of emergencies, you understand. What if you fell and we needed to get in quickly? Or what if you locked yourself out and needed help? We'd hate for you to be stuck outside, especially in bad weather." I stared at her, my mind processing this additional invasion. I've lived in my apartment at 412 Riverside Terrace for 15 years. I've never locked myself out, not once. "But what if you did? These things happen, especially as we get older." Her hand was still extended, palm up, waiting expectantly. "We just want to make sure you're safe, Dorothy. That's all we want. To know that if something happened, if you needed us, we could get to you immediately." I looked back toward Damien's office, but he had remained at his desk, already absorbed in his computer screen. The matter settled as far as he was concerned. There would be no support from that direction, no one to argue on my behalf. With shaking fingers, I removed my apartment key. It was on a small chain with a pressed flower pendant that Gerald had given me on our 20th anniversary. I hesitated for just a moment, looking at that little piece of my husband's love, then slid it off and placed the key in Sienna's palm. Her fingers closed around it possessively, triumphantly, and her smile widened. Perfect, she said brightly. Now we can all relax knowing you're taken care of. Isn't it wonderful to have family who cares so much? As I walked to my car, the old Honda Civic I'd maintained carefully for 12 years, I felt the autumn wind cut through my light jacket. The leaves were turning gold and red in the trees lining Damien Street, beautiful and dying at the same time. I fumbled with my car keys, my hands trembling again now that I was away from their watching eyes. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than the usual 25 minutes. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, analyzing every word, every look, every subtle signal I might have missed. The streets of Riverside passed by in a blur, the familiar landmarks, the coffee shop where I met my book club every Thursday, the library where I volunteered on Tuesdays, the park where Gerald and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. All of it felt distant now, like I was seeing my life through a fog. When I finally climbed the 2 flights of stairs to my apartment, my legs felt heavy with more than just physical fatigue. I unlocked my door with the key I still had, for now, and stepped into the small space that had been my sanctuary for so many years. My 1-bedroom apartment wasn't much. The furniture was old, most of it pieces that Gerald and I had bought together decades ago. The sofa with the faded floral pattern that I'd reupholstered myself. The coffee table with the water ring from where Damien had once set down a glass when he was 10 years old. The bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks and hardcovers, mysteries and romances and biographies that had kept me company through lonely evenings. But it was mine. Or it had been mine. I sank into my favorite reading chair by the window, the one that looked out over the small courtyard garden below, and finally let myself feel everything I'd been holding back in Damien's office. The hurt of being treated like a child, the fear of what this meant for my future, the anger at being manipulated so thoroughly, the grief for the relationship with my son that I'd apparently already lost without realizing it. But underneath all of those emotions, there was something else growing, something harder and colder than grief. A small seed of suspicion that was beginning to take root in my mind. Damien's suddenly expensive house, his new furniture, his new car, his comfortable lifestyle that seemed to have appeared overnight. Sienna's designer clothes and obvious expensive tastes despite being unemployed. Their eagerness to control my finances, to limit my access to my own money, the way they'd worked together so seamlessly to back me into a corner. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, something I'd been doing religiously for years to keep track of my accounts. I entered my password and waited for the screen to load. Access denied. Please contact your financial institution. My blood ran cold. I tried again, thinking I'd mistyped my password. Same message. They hadn't just taken my debit card, they'd already locked me out of my online banking. I sat there in my reading chair as the afternoon faded into evening, watching the shadows lengthen across my small apartment, and I knew with absolute certainty that something very wrong was happening. This wasn't about protecting me from scammers or helping an elderly mother manage her finances. This was about something else entirely. And whatever Damien and Sienna were planning, whatever they'd already done, I had a terrible feeling I was about to discover that losing access to my bank card was only the beginning. The apartment felt colder as night fell, or maybe it was just me. Chilled from the inside out by the realization that I couldn't trust my own son. The streetlights flickered on outside my window, casting long shadows across the walls, and I sat in my chair without turning on any lights, invisible in my own home. Tomorrow, I would need to figure out what was really happening. Tomorrow, I would need to find a way to protect myself. But tonight, I just sat in the darkness and mourned the loss of the son I thought I had, and the future I thought I'd secured. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have imagined as I sat there alone in my small apartment, was that this was only the opening move in a game I hadn't known I was playing. Damien and Sienna hadn't just taken my access to my money. They'd taken my money itself. And the discovery I was about to make would force me to become someone I'd never been before. Someone who would fight back with everything I had. Because at 70 years old, I was about to learn that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones you need to protect yourself from most. And I was about to teach my son that underestimating his mother was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray, overcast sky that matched my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night, my mind cycling through everything that had happened in Damien's office. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sienna's cold smile as she took my apartment key, heard Damien's words echoing in my head, "You can't be trusted with it." I made coffee in my small kitchen. The familiar ritual provided little comfort. My hands still trembled slightly as I poured the water, measured the grounds, waited for the pot to brew. Everything in my apartment looked the same as it had yesterday morning, but somehow it all felt different now. Tainted. Like I was living in a space that wasn't entirely mine anymore, now that Sienna and Damien had a key.
The coffee tasted bitter. Or maybe that was just my mood. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one Gerald and I had bought at a yard sale 30 years ago and refinished together, and tried to make a plan. But where did you even start when your own child had essentially taken control of your life? My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Damien. "Mom, just wanted to check in. How are you feeling this morning? Remember, if you need anything at all, just let me know. We're here for you." The casual tone, the performative concern, it all felt like sandpaper against my raw emotions. I stared at the message for a long moment, trying to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to call him, to demand answers, to ask why I couldn't access my online banking anymore. But another part of me, the part that had spent a sleepless night thinking through every detail of yesterday's conversation, told me to be cautious, to wait, to understand what was really happening before I showed my hand. I typed back a simple response. "I'm fine. Thank you for checking." 3 dots appeared immediately, showing he was typing. Then, "Great. Sienna and I were thinking you should come over for dinner tonight. She's making her famous lasagna. 6 p.m.? I felt my stomach clench. The thought of sitting at their table, eating food prepared by the woman who had so smoothly orchestrated my loss of independence made me feel physically ill, but I also recognized an opportunity. If I wanted to understand what they were really doing, I needed to stay close. I needed to observe them, listen carefully, look for clues about their true intentions. "That sounds lovely. I'll be there." "Perfect. See you tonight, Mom. Love you." Love you. The words felt hollow, performative. When had my son's expressions of love become something that felt like manipulation rather than genuine affection? I set my phone down and took a long sip of my bitter coffee, thinking, if I couldn't access my online banking, I needed to go to the bank in person. But would they even let me access my account without my debit card? I still had my driver's license, my social security card, proof of who I was. Surely they couldn't deny me access to my own money. I finished my coffee, got dressed in my nicest slacks and blouse as if looking professional would somehow help my case, and drove to the Riverside Community Bank on 5th Street. It was a small branch, one I'd been banking at for 25 years. The tellers knew me by name, had watched me come in regularly to deposit checks and manage my accounts. The parking lot was nearly empty at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning. I walked through the glass doors into the familiar lobby with its outdated carpet and potted plants that always looked slightly dusty. Margaret Chen, one of the senior tellers, looked up from her station and smiled at me. "Dorothy, good morning. How are you today?" "I'm well, Margaret, thank you." I approached her window, trying to keep my voice steady and casual. "I need to access my checking account. I seem to have misplaced my debit card, and I'd like to withdraw some cash and get a new card issued."
Margaret's fingers flew over her keyboard, pulling up my account. Then her expression changed, a slight furrow appearing between her eyebrows. "Let me just check something," she said, her tone shifting from friendly to professional. She typed some more, clicked her mouse several times, then looked up at me with obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm seeing some restrictions on your account. Let me get Mr. Peterson for you. He'll be able to explain better than I can." "Restrictions? What kind of restrictions?" "Please, just give me one moment." Margaret disappeared into the back office, leaving me standing at the window with a growing sense of dread. A few minutes later, she returned with Raymond Peterson, the branch manager. He was a man in his 50s, always professionally dressed, always cordial but distant. He gestured toward his office. "Mrs. Hartwell, why don't we talk in private?" I followed him into his small office, my legs feeling unsteady. He closed the door behind us and gestured to a chair across from his desk. I sat, gripping my purse in my lap like it was the only solid thing in a world that had started tilting sideways. "Mrs. Hartwell," he began, his tone carefully neutral, "I understand you're trying to access your checking account this morning." "Yes, it's my money. I should be able to access it whenever I want." Of course," he nodded, folding his hands on his desk. "However, I'm seeing that as of yesterday afternoon, your account has been placed under joint management with your son, Damien Hartwell. He came in with power of attorney documentation and updated the account structure." The room seemed to spin. Power of attorney? I never signed any power of attorney documents. Mr. Peterson's expression became even more uncomfortable. "According to our records, the documents are properly notarized. Your signature is on file. Mr. Hartwell explained that you'd agreed to this arrangement due to some concerns about your ability to manage your finances independently." "That's not true," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I never agreed to any such thing. I never signed anything giving him power of attorney." "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand this is upsetting, but the documentation appears to be in order. Your son has legal authority to manage this account on your behalf. Now, that doesn't mean you can't access your funds, but any withdrawals over $200 will require his approval." $200? The $50 weekly allowance Damien had mentioned suddenly made more sense. He had already legally restricted my access to my own money before I had even left his house yesterday. "How is this possible?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could he change my account without me being present?"
With proper power of attorney documentation, an agent can make these changes on behalf of the principal. It's a common arrangement for elderly individuals who need assistance managing their affairs. "I'm not incapacitated. I'm 70 years old, not 90. My mind is perfectly clear." "I'm sure it is, Mrs. Hartwell." His tone was soothing, patronizing, the voice people use when they're trying to calm someone they believe is being irrational. "But legally, with these documents on file, my hands are tied. If you believe there's been some kind of error or fraud, you'd need to contact a lawyer and have them review the paperwork." I stood up on shaky legs. "I'd like copies of everything, every document that was filed, every change that was made to my account." "Of course. I'll have Margaret print everything out for you. It may take a few minutes." I waited in the lobby while Margaret prepared the documents, my mind racing. Power of attorney. When could he have possibly gotten me to sign such documents? Had I signed something without reading it carefully? Had there been papers mixed in with something else I'd agreed to? Then I remembered. About 6 months ago, Damien had brought me some papers to sign. "Just medical directives, Mom," he'd said. "Making sure that if anything happens to you, I can make healthcare decisions. It's something everyone should have." I'd been so touched that he was thinking about my welfare, so grateful that he cared enough to help me get my affairs in order, that I'd signed without reading every page carefully. Had I actually signed away my financial autonomy while thinking I was just authorizing medical decisions? Margaret handed me a thick folder of papers. "Everything you requested, Mrs. Hartwell. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No. Thank you, Margaret." I walked out of the bank feeling like I'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. In my car, I opened the folder with trembling hands and began reading through the documents. There it was.
A durable power of attorney dated 6 months ago with my signature at the bottom. But as I read through the dense legal language, I realized it wasn't just for medical decisions. It was a comprehensive power of attorney giving Damien authority over my financial affairs, my property, my health care, essentially every aspect of my life. How had I been so stupid? How had I signed something so significant without reading it thoroughly? But I knew the answer. I'd trusted my son. I'd believed him when he said it was just about healthcare. I never imagined he would lie to me, manipulate me, use my trust against me. I sat in the bank parking lot for a long time, reading through every document, understanding piece by piece how thoroughly I'd been trapped. The power of attorney had been filed 6 months ago, but Damien hadn't activated the financial controls until yesterday. He'd been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment. And Sienna? Had she been part of the plan from the beginning? Had she encouraged this or even suggested it? I thought back to when they'd started dating. February, Damien had said. 8 months ago. Just 2 months after he'd gotten me to sign those papers. The timeline was starting to make horrible sense. My phone rang. It was Rosemary Chen, my friend from book club. We'd known each other for 15 years, had supported each other through widowhood and the loneliness that came with aging. She was one of the few people in my life I trusted completely. "Dorothy, are you all right? I just had the strangest conversation with my daughter." "What kind of conversation?" "She saw a post on social media last night from someone named Sienna Whitmore. Do you know her?" "She's my son's girlfriend." "Why? What did she post?" Linda showed me on her phone. It was a post in some kind of women's group, talking about dealing with difficult elderly parents. She didn't mention you by name, but Dorothy, she was clearly talking about you. She wrote about helping her boyfriend manage her mother's finances because the mother was becoming forgetful and unreasonable. She made it sound like you were practically senile. The humiliation burned through me like acid. Not only were they stealing my independence, they were publicly portraying me as incompetent, creating a narrative that would justify their actions to anyone who might question them. "There's more," Rosemary continued, her voice gentle but urgent. She was asking for advice on how to handle resistance from elderly parents who don't want help. The responses were all about how sometimes you have to do what's best for people even when they fight against it. Dorothy, it sounded like she was building a case, gathering evidence that she's just trying to help a difficult old woman. "She is building a case, because she and my son are stealing from me." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Saying them out loud made them real in a way they hadn't been before. "What? Dorothy, what are you talking about?" I told her everything. The meeting yesterday, the confiscated bank card and apartment key, the $50 allowance, the power of attorney I'd unknowingly signed, the restricted bank account I'd just discovered. All of it came pouring out in a rush of words that left me breathless and shaking. When I finished, Rosemary was silent for a long moment. Then, "You need a lawyer. Today, right now. This is elder abuse, Dorothy. This is financial exploitation." "I know, but I don't even know where to start, and I don't have access to money to pay for a lawyer." "My daughter Linda is a paralegal at Morrison & Associates downtown. Let me call her. They handle elder law cases. She can at least point you in the right direction, maybe even get you a consultation." "Rosemary, I can't afford." "We'll figure that out. First, you need to understand your legal options. Promise me you'll talk to her if she can set something up." I promised, and we hung up. I sat in my car, staring at the thick folder of documents that represented my own betrayal of myself, and felt something shifting inside me. The shock and hurt were still there, but underneath them, something else was growing, something harder and more determined. I was 70 years old, but I wasn't dead yet. I wasn't helpless. I'd survived widowhood, survived decades of working and managing on my own, survived challenges that would have broken lesser people. I had raised Damien alone after Gerald died, had put him through college while managing my own career and household. I wasn't the confused, incompetent old woman they were trying to portray me as, and I wasn't going to let them steal everything I'd worked for without a fight. My phone buzzed with another text from Damien. "Mom, forgot to mention, bring your mail with you tonight. Sienna's going to help you organize your bills and make sure everything gets paid on time. We want to make this transition as smooth as possible for you." They wanted my mail, so they could control what I saw, what bills I knew about, what information I had access to. Another piece of my independence, another strip of my autonomy sliced away with surgical precision. I texted back, "Of course, see you at 6. But I was already making a plan. If they wanted me to come to dinner, to play the role of the grateful, confused elderly mother being helped by her devoted son and his caring girlfriend, then that's exactly what I would do. While I gathered evidence, while I figured out exactly what they'd already stolen and what they were planning to steal, while I built my own case against them. They thought they were so clever, so much smarter than the old woman they were manipulating. Damien thought he knew me, thought he could predict my responses, control my reactions. But he'd forgotten something crucial. He'd forgotten that I was the one who raised him. I knew how he thought, how he operated, what his weaknesses were. I'd watched him grow from a helpless infant into a calculating adult, and I'd seen every stage in between. If this was war, and it was becoming clear that it was, then I had advantages they didn't know about. I started my car and drove, not home, but to the Riverside Public Library. If I couldn't access information on my own computer, fearful that somehow they might be monitoring it, then I'd use the library's public computers. I needed to research power of attorney laws, financial elder abuse, legal options for victims of exploitation. I needed to understand the battlefield before I could plan my strategy. The library was quiet at mid-morning, just a few patrons scattered among the stacks. I found a computer terminal in the back corner, logged in with my library card, and began to search. What I discovered over the next 3 hours both horrified and empowered me. Financial exploitation of elderly people was far more common than I'd realized. Adult children taking control of parents' finances, using power of attorney documents to legally steal from the people who'd raised them. The stories I read were heartbreaking. Elderly people left destitute by their own family members, their life savings drained to fund their children's lifestyles. But I also found information about legal recourse. Power of attorney could be challenged if it had been obtained through fraud or misrepresentation. Financial institutions could be held accountable if they allowed obvious exploitation to continue. There were organizations that helped elderly victims, lawyers who specialized in these cases, resources I hadn't known existed. I printed out pages of information, careful to use cash from my purse to pay for the copies, rather than my library card account, which might leave a digital trail Damien could somehow access. I was probably being paranoid, but paranoia seemed appropriate, even the circumstances. By the time I left the library, I had a folder full of information and a growing sense of purpose. I drove home to my apartment, made myself a sandwich I barely tasted, and called the number Rosemary had texted me for her daughter Linda. Linda Chen was in her late 30s, professional and kind on the phone. She listened to my story without interrupting, and when I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want to be honest with you. This is going to be difficult. Your son has legal documentation that appears to be properly executed. Challenging a power of attorney requires proving either that you weren't mentally competent when you signed it, which doesn't seem to be the case, or that you were deceived about what you were signing, which is harder to prove." My heart sank. So there's nothing I can do? I didn't say that. The fact that he's restricting your access to your own funds, that he's essentially isolating you financially, those are red flags for elder abuse. We have a senior partner, Elizabeth Morrison, who specializes in these cases. Let me talk to her and see if she'd be willing to meet with you. We might be able to build a case, especially if we can prove that your son is actually stealing from you rather than just managing your affairs. How would we prove that? We'd need to examine your account activity closely. Look for withdrawals or transfers that don't make sense, expenses that aren't related to your care or legitimate bills. If he's using your money for his own purposes, that's a violation of his fiduciary duty as your power of attorney. That could be grounds for having the POA revoked and potentially for criminal charges. Criminal charges. Against my own son. The thought made me feel sick, but underneath the nausea was a cold clarity. If he was stealing from me, he deserved to face consequences, family or not. I'd like to meet with Miss Morrison, I said firmly, as soon as possible. Let me see what I can do. I'll call you back within the hour.
After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and looked around at the life I'd built. Modest, simple, but mine. Or it had been mine until yesterday. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Damien, this time with a photo attached. It was a picture of a beautiful lasagna fresh from the oven, cheese bubbling and golden. Sienna's been cooking all afternoon. Can't wait to see you tonight. Remember to bring your mail. The exclamation points felt aggressive, like enforced cheerfulness designed to make me feel guilty for any negative thoughts. Like I was supposed to be grateful for the home-cooked meal and ignore the fact that they were systematically taking control of every aspect of my life. I looked at the photo for a long moment, then typed back, "It looks delicious. I'll be there at 6. But in my mind, I was already planning what to observe, what to listen for, what questions to ask that might reveal more about their plans. Tonight wasn't just dinner. It was reconnaissance. They'd made the mistake of thinking I was helpless, confused, easily controlled. They'd underestimated their opponent because they saw age and assumed weakness. They were about to learn they were wrong. Linda called back 45 minutes later. "Good news! Elizabeth can see you tomorrow morning at 9. Her office is at 1840 Commerce Street, Suite 400. Don't bring any documents or papers with you tomorrow, just yourself. She wants to hear your story first before we dive into the legal details." "Thank you, Linda. Thank your mother for me, too. Mrs. Hartwell, one more thing. Be careful tonight. Don't confront your son or his girlfriend yet. Don't let them know you're seeking legal help. Just observe, listen, gather information. The more we know about their actions and intentions, the stronger our case will be." After she hung up, I sat with those words. Be careful. As if my own son were a threat I needed to protect myself from, which I was realizing with growing certainty he was. I spent the afternoon preparing for dinner like I was preparing for battle. I chose my clothes carefully, a soft cardigan and comfortable pants that made me look gentle and non-threatening. I practiced my expressions in the bathroom mirror, making sure I could maintain a pleasant, slightly confused demeanor no matter what. If they wanted to see a harmless old woman, that's exactly what I'd show them. Well, they never saw the steel underneath. At 5:30, I gathered some mail from my mailbox, deliberately choosing the items that looked most innocuous. Bills I knew were already paid, advertisements, nothing important. The real mail, the bank statements and financial documents I'd already collected, those I'd already hidden in a locked box under my bed. I drove to Damien's house in Meadowbrook Hills, the expensive neighborhood that should have been my first clue that something was wrong. My son was living far beyond the means his consulting business should have provided, and I'd been too trusting, too proud of his success to question where the money was coming from. Now I knew, or at least I suspected. The money was coming from me. I pulled into his circular driveway at exactly 6 o'clock, grabbed my purse and the stack of mail, and walked to his front door with a pleasant smile fixed on my face. It was time for Act 2 of this performance. And unlike yesterday, when I'd been the unwitting victim, tonight I was walking in with my eyes wide open. Damien answered the door with a broad smile. "Mom, perfect timing. Come in, come in. Dinner's just about ready." As I stepped into his house, breathing in the rich smell of Italian cooking, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. I was about to spy on my own son, to gather evidence against him, to build a case that might destroy our relationship forever. But he'd destroyed it first when he'd decided I was nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Now I was just recognizing reality. And reality, I was discovering, required me to be much stronger than I ever thought I'd need to be. Sienna greeted me in the foyer with her signature perfect smile, wearing an apron over what looked like a $500 silk dress. The image was almost comical. The wealthy woman playing at domesticity. "Dorothy, I'm so glad you could make it. Dinner is almost ready. Why don't you sit in the living room while I finish up?" Damien, get your mother something to drink. I settled onto their expensive leather sofa, the one that had appeared in this house about 4 months ago, and accepted a glass of water from Damien. I deliberately fumbled with it slightly, letting a few drops spill onto my hand, playing the part of the shaky old woman they expected to see. "Careful, Mom," Damien said, grabbing a napkin. There was that patronizing tone again, the one that treated me like a child. "Thank you, dear. I'm just a bit tired today. I didn't sleep well last night." "Well, that's exactly why this new arrangement is good for you," Sienna called from the kitchen. "Less stress means better sleep. You'll see." I took a small sip of water and looked around the room with fresh eyes. Really looked, analyzing everything I saw. The new furniture, the expensive artwork on the walls, the designer light fixtures. Even the wine bottles displayed on the bar cart in the corner were premium labels, the kind that cost $50 or more per bottle. All of this had appeared in the past 6 to 8 months, right around the time Sienna entered the picture, right after Damien had gotten me to sign that power of attorney. "Damien, honey," I said, making my voice soft and curious rather than accusatory. "Business must be going wonderfully. Your house looks more beautiful every time I visit." He looked pleased, settling into the chair across from me. "It really has been incredible, Mom. We landed some major contracts this year. Corporate clients, big budgets. Everything's finally coming together." "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard." I paused, then added innocently, "Sienna, dear, have you found a new position yet? Last time we talked, you mentioned you were transitioning careers." There was the briefest flicker of something across her face before the smile returned. "Actually, I've decided to take some time to focus on other priorities. Damien's been so supportive, insisting that I don't rush into just any job. We're thinking about starting a business together." "How exciting! What kind of business?" "Oh, we're still in the planning stages," she said vaguely, bringing in a basket of garlic bread. "Let's eat before everything gets cold. Dorothy, you sit here at the head of the table, guest of honor." The dinner table was set beautifully, like something from a magazine. Fresh flowers in a crystal vase, cloth napkins, multiple wine glasses. I wondered how much of this lifestyle had been funded by my money. The lasagna was admittedly delicious, and I complimented Sienna genuinely. She beamed with pride, and I watched as she and Damien exchanged satisfied glances. They thought everything was going according to plan. The difficult old woman had been subdued, was being cooperative, was playing her assigned role. "Did you bring your mail, Mom?" Damien asked as Sienna served salad. "Oh, yes, it's in my purse. Let me get it." I retrieved the stack I'd carefully curated and handed it to him. He flipped through it quickly, his expression showing brief disappointment. "Nothing important," his face said. "Just junk mail and advertisements." But he recovered quickly. "Good, good. We'll set up a system where your mail gets forwarded directly here. That way, we can make sure nothing gets missed." "Forward my mail?" I let a tremor enter my voice. "But then, how will I know what's happening with my accounts?" "That's the point, Mom," Sienna said gently, as if explaining to a confused child. "You don't need to worry about any of that anymore. We'll handle it all. You just focus on enjoying your life, reading your books, seeing your friends, gardening, all the things you love." "Speaking of which," Damien interjected, "we were thinking it might be good for you to cut back on some of your activities. The book club, the library volunteering, all that running around. At your age, you should be resting more." My blood went cold, but I kept my expression neutral. "Cut back on my activities? But those are the things that give my life meaning." "We're just concerned about you overdoing it," Sienna said, reaching across to pat my hand.
Her touch felt like ice. "You're 70 years old, Dorothy. You should be taking it easy, not exhausting yourself with social obligations." They weren't just trying to control my money. They were trying to isolate me, cut me off from my friends, from my support system, from anyone who might notice something was wrong or question what was happening to me. I took a bite of lasagna to buy myself time to control my reaction. "I suppose I could think about it," I said finally, making my voice uncertain. "But I would miss my friends terribly."
You can still see them, Damien assured me. Just here at the house. We'll host gatherings for you. That way you don't have to drive and we can make sure you're safe. Safe. The word was becoming a weapon they used against me. Everything they did was framed as being for my safety, my protection, my own good. That's very thoughtful of you both, I murmured. After dinner, Sienna brought out a beautiful chocolate cake. Dessert! And Dorothy, I have something else for you. She disappeared into another room and returned with a smartphone in a pink case. We got you a new phone. Your old one is so outdated. This one is much easier to use for seniors. I looked at the device she was holding out. A phone they'd selected, a phone they'd set up, a phone they would likely monitor. But I like my phone. I know how it works. This one is better, I promise, Damien said. It has bigger buttons, simpler menus. Plus, we've already programmed in all the important numbers. We can help you transfer your contacts later. They wanted to control my communications, too. Monitor who I called, who I texted, possibly even track my location. That's very kind, but... Mom, please. Damien's voice had an edge now. We went to a lot of trouble to get this for you. Can you just accept help without arguing? I saw the flash of anger in his eyes and made a calculation. If I resisted too much, they might become suspicious. I needed them to think I was compliant, cooperative, while I gathered information and built my case. You're right. I'm sorry. Thank you. It's very thoughtful. I accepted the phone, turning it over in my hands. I'll need help setting it up. We'll do it right now, Sienna said brightly. The rest of dessert was spent with them showing me the phone, transferring my contacts, setting up the apps. I watched carefully, noting that they installed a family tracking app, a medication reminder app, and several others that would give them access to my activities and location. By the time I left at 8:30, I felt exhausted from maintaining my act, but I had also learned valuable information. They were moving quickly to isolate me, to control every aspect of my life, which suggested they were worried about something. Worried I might resist, might discover something, might talk to the wrong people? What were they so afraid I'd find out? I drove home slowly, my mind racing. Instead of going straight to my apartment, I made a detour to a convenience store 3 blocks away and used their payphone, an old relic that most people had forgotten existed. I called Rosemary on her landline. It's me, I said when she answered. Don't call my cell phone anymore. They gave me a new one tonight, and I think they're monitoring it. Oh, Dorothy, this is getting worse. I know, but I'm meeting with that lawyer tomorrow morning. I'll call you afterward from a payphone. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the convenience store parking lot and made a decision. I couldn't go back to my apartment tonight, not when Sienna and Damien had a key, not when I was carrying a phone they could track. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't think to look for me. I drove to a modest hotel on the outskirts of Riverside, the kind of place that still accepted cash and didn't ask too many questions. I paid for 1 night from my purse, registered under a false name, and carried my overnight bag to a small room on the 2nd floor. Only then, with the door locked and the chain engaged, did I let myself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and finally let the tears come. Not just for the betrayal, not just for the loss of my independence, but for the death of the relationship I'd thought I had with my son. The Damien I'd raised, the boy I loved and sacrificed for, he was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed the way I'd believed. Maybe I'd been so desperate to see the best in him that I'd ignored the warning signs that probably had been there all along. But I couldn't afford to wallow in grief.
Not yet. Tomorrow morning, I would meet with Elizabeth Morrison and hopefully begin the process of fighting back. I barely slept, jerking awake at every sound in the hallway, terrified that somehow Damien and Sienna had tracked me down. But morning came without incident, and at 8 o'clock, I checked out of the hotel and drove to the address Linda had given me. Morrison and Associates occupied a suite in a modern office building downtown. The reception area was professional but warm, designed to put nervous clients at ease. I gave my name to the receptionist, and within minutes, Linda Chen appeared to greet me. "Mrs. Hartwell, come with me. Elizabeth is ready to see you." Elizabeth Morrison was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. Her office was lined with law books and case files, the workspace of someone who took her work seriously. "Mrs. Hartwell, please sit down," she gestured to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Linda has briefed me on the basics of your situation, but I'd like to hear the full story from you. Take your time, include every detail you can remember, no matter how small it seems." So, I told her everything. The power of attorney I'd been tricked into signing, the confiscated bank card and apartment key, the restricted bank accounts, the new phone with tracking software, the attempts to isolate me from my friends and activities, the timeline of Damien's suddenly expensive lifestyle coinciding with Sienna's appearance and the POA being executed. Elizabeth took notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression that was both sympathetic and grimly determined.
"Mrs. Hartwell, what you've described is textbook financial elder abuse. Your son has systematically isolated you, restricted your access to your own resources, and is likely using your funds for his personal benefit. The power of attorney gives him legal cover, but it doesn't give him the right to exploit you. Can we stop him? We can try. Here's what I need to do first. I need to see complete records of your financial accounts, every transaction since the power of attorney was executed. We need to trace where your money has been going. If we can prove that he's been using your funds inappropriately, that's grounds for having the POA revoked and potentially pursuing criminal charges." "But I can't access my accounts. He's locked me out." "You can if you come with me to the bank right now with a court order requiring them to provide complete account records. Linda's already been working on getting an emergency order from Judge Patterson. He's familiar with elder abuse cases and moves quickly on them." My heart leaped with hope. "Really? We can do that?" "We can and we will. Linda should have the order within the hour. In the meantime, I need you to write down everything you can remember about your financial situation before your son took control. How much was in your accounts? What were your monthly expenses? Any large purchases or withdrawals you're aware of? The more detail you can provide, the better." For the next hour, I worked with Linda to document everything I could remember about my finances. My pension amount, my Social Security payments, my typical monthly expenses, the approximate balance I'd had in my checking and savings accounts 6 months ago. At 10:30, Linda's phone rang. She answered, listened, then smiled. "Judge Patterson signed the order. We can go to the bank now." The three of us, Elizabeth, Linda, and myself, drove to Riverside Community Bank together. Elizabeth walked in with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before and requested an immediate meeting with Mr. Peterson. He was far less comfortable when facing an attorney than he'd been yesterday dealing with a confused elderly woman. Elizabeth handed him the court order and spoke in a voice that brooked no argument. "This order requires you to provide complete account records for Dorothy Hartwell for the past 6 months, including all transactions, transfers, and withdrawals. We'll wait while you compile them." It took 45 minutes, but eventually Mr. Peterson returned with thick printouts of every account I held at the bank. Elizabeth spread them across a table in a conference room and began going through them with Linda while I watched over their shoulders. What we discovered made my stomach turn. Over the past 6 months, more than $85,000 had been transferred out of my accounts, not for my rent, not for my utilities, not for any legitimate expenses related to my care.
The money had been systematically drained through a series of transfers and withdrawals, some going directly to Damien's personal account, some to Sienna's account, some to various businesses and luxury retailers. "Look at this," Linda said, pointing to a series of transactions. $15,000 to a jewelry store, $8,000 to a luxury car dealership, $12,000 to a furniture store. None of this is for your benefit, Mrs. Hartwell. Elizabeth's face was grim as she photographed each page with her phone. This is theft, pure and simple. He's been using his power of attorney as legal cover to systematically rob his own mother. I stared at the numbers, each one representing a piece of my security being stolen. Money that was supposed to support me through my retirement, through potential medical needs, through the uncertain years ahead. Money I'd earned, saved, protected. Gone. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now, we take this to the police," Elizabeth said firmly, "and we file for an emergency guardianship hearing to have his power of attorney revoked. We're going to stop this, Mrs. Hartwell. Today." The next few hours passed in a blur. We went to the Riverside Police Department where Elizabeth presented our evidence to Detective Maria Santos in the Financial Crimes Division. Detective Santos listened carefully, reviewed the account records, and her expression grew increasingly serious. "This is definitely criminal elder abuse and theft," she confirmed. "I'm going to need to interview Mrs. Hartwell formally and begin an investigation. Given the amount of money involved and the systematic nature of the theft, we're looking at felony charges." Felony charges. Against my son. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow. But underneath the grief was a cold satisfaction. He deserved to face consequences for what he had done. I gave my formal statement to Detective Santos, describing everything that had happened: the deception about the power of attorney, the restricted accounts, the isolation tactics, the stolen money. By the time I finished, it was nearly 3 p.m. "Mrs. Hartwell," Detective Santos said gently, "I need to ask you something. Are you safe? Do you feel threatened by your son or his girlfriend?" "I don't think they'd physically hurt me," I said slowly, "but they have a key to my apartment. They have a phone with tracking software they gave me. I'm not sure anywhere is safe right now." "Don't go back to your apartment tonight," advised Elizabeth. "Stay somewhere they won't think to look for you. Tomorrow we have the guardianship hearing. Once the judge revokes the power of attorney and freezes the accounts, you'll have your life back." That night, I stayed with Rosemary. I had called her from a payphone to explain what was happening, and she had immediately insisted I stay in her guest room. I slept better than I had in days, knowing I was finally taking action, finally fighting back.
The next morning, Elizabeth picked me up at 7. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for 9 in Judge Patricia Brennan's courtroom. Elizabeth had filed emergency motions to revoke Damien's power of attorney and restore my independent control of my finances. We arrived at the courthouse at 8:30. Damien was already there with his own attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he cost more per hour than I'd made in a week at my job. When Damien saw me, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then anger. "Mom, what are you doing here? What's going on?" "She's protecting herself from you," Elizabeth said coolly. "Don't speak to my client." "Your client? Mom, what have you done? Have you hired a lawyer?" His voice rose, drawing attention from others in the hallway. "Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost? You can't afford this." "Actually, I can afford it with the money you haven't stolen yet," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I know everything, Damien. I know about the $85,000 you've taken. I know about the furniture, the jewelry, the cars, all of it purchased with my money." His face went pale. "That's not what happened. I was managing your funds. Some of those purchases were investments." "We'll let the judge decide that, and the police. Detective Santos is very interested in talking to you about financial elder abuse and theft." "Police?" Damien looked genuinely shocked now. "Mom, you called the police on me, your own son?"
"You stole from me," I said, and my voice broke slightly on the words. "You manipulated me, lied to me, treated me like I was nothing more than a bank account for you to raid. What did you expect me to do?" Before he could answer, the courtroom doors opened and a bailiff called our case. We filed into the courtroom, Elizabeth and I on one side, Damien and his attorney on the other. Judge Brennan was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Elizabeth presented our case efficiently. The fraudulently obtained power of attorney, the restricted bank accounts, the systematic theft of $85,000, the isolation tactics. She presented bank records, my testimony, and the police report from Detective Santos's initial investigation. Damien's attorney tried to argue that all the expenditures had been legitimate management of my affairs, but the evidence was overwhelming. $15,000 on jewelry couldn't be explained as managing my healthcare expenses. A new luxury car in Sienna's name wasn't a necessary purchase for my well-being. Judge Brennan listened to everything, asked pointed questions, and reviewed the financial documents. Finally, she set down her pen and looked directly at Damien. "Mr. Hartwell, a power of attorney is a sacred trust. It gives someone authority to act on behalf of another person, but it comes with a fiduciary duty to act in that person's best interest, not your own. The evidence before me shows clearly that you have violated that duty. You've systematically stolen from your own mother, using legal documentation she signed under false pretenses as cover for financial exploitation." She turned to me. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry you've had to endure this betrayal from your own child. No one should have to fight their family for the right to control their own life." Then back to Damien. "I'm revoking the power of attorney effective immediately. Mrs. Hartwell's accounts are to be unfrozen and restored to her sole control. Additionally, I'm ordering you to make full restitution of all improperly withdrawn funds. You have 30 days to return the $85,000 you've stolen or face additional legal consequences. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," he whispered. As we left the courtroom, Elizabeth handed me a folder. "These are court-certified copies of the judge's order. Take them to your bank immediately. They'll unfreeze your accounts and restore your access. I've also prepared a document revoking Damien's key access to your apartment. You should consider changing your locks anyway." "Thank you," I said, tears streaming down my face now. "Thank you for believing me, for fighting for me. You fought for yourself, Mrs. Hartwell. You found the courage to stand up to someone you loved when they were hurting you. That takes incredible strength." Behind us, I heard Damien calling out, "Mom, please, can we talk? I can explain everything. Sienna, she was the one who—" I turned to look at my son one last time. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of his own actions. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to make excuses for him the way I had throughout his childhood whenever he made mistakes.
But he wasn't a child anymore, and this wasn't a mistake. It was calculated betrayal, sustained over months, deliberately designed to rob me of everything I'd worked for. "Goodbye, Damien," I said quietly. "I hope someday you understand the enormity of what you've done. Not just the theft, but the betrayal of trust, the destruction of our relationship. That's something you can never pay back, no matter how much money you return." I walked away without looking back, Elizabeth and Linda flanking me like protective bodyguards. We went straight to Riverside Community Bank, where Mr. Peterson, faced with a court order and the presence of an attorney, was suddenly very cooperative. Within an hour, my accounts were restored to my sole control. My online banking was reactivated with a new password. A new debit card was ordered. "The funds that were improperly withdrawn will need to be returned by your son per the court order," Mr. Peterson explained. "But your remaining balance is now accessible to you. I apologize for the difficulties you experienced." I looked at my account balance. What had been nearly $90,000 6 months ago was now barely $5,000. But it was mine again. I controlled it.
I had autonomy. Over the next month, pieces of my life slowly returned to normal. Damien, faced with the threat of criminal prosecution, sold the expensive furniture and jewelry. He borrowed money from friends and family, probably telling them some story that made him the victim. Gradually, money was deposited back into my account until the full $85,000 had been restored. I never spoke to him again. He tried calling, tried showing up at my apartment, but I had changed my locks and my phone number. Elizabeth helped me file for a restraining order that required him to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. Sienna, interestingly, disappeared shortly after the court hearing. I heard through Rosemary's network of gossip that she'd moved on to another man, another potential mark. She'd never loved Damien. She simply recognized a weak spot she could exploit. And when that avenue closed, she moved on to find another vulnerable target. I rejoined my book club and my library volunteering with renewed appreciation. My friends surrounded me with support, never judging, never saying, "I told you so," just welcoming me back and letting me heal at my own pace. 6 months after the court hearing, I was sitting in my reading chair one evening, a cup of tea beside me and a good mystery novel in my lap, when I realized something profound. I felt happy. Not the nervous, conditional happiness of someone trying to please others, but genuine contentment with my own company and my own choices. I'd lost my son. Or perhaps more accurately, I discovered I'd never really had the son I thought I did. That loss still ached, probably always would, but I'd gained something more valuable. I'd gained myself back. My independence, my autonomy, my self-respect, my right to make my own decisions, my own mistakes, to live my life on my own terms. At 70 years old, I'd learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones you need to protect yourself from most. I'd learned that age doesn't mean weakness, that being vulnerable doesn't mean being helpless, and I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were hurting you? Comment below with your thoughts. And if you know someone who might be experiencing financial abuse from their family, please share this story. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone, that it's okay to fight back, that their independence and dignity are worth protecting. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for bearing witness to my story. And remember, you're never too old to stand up for yourself. Never too old to say no more. Never too old to reclaim your life.